All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Will Haynes of the Watkins Museum of History. I'm delighted to welcome the Lawrence chapter of the League of Women Voters to the museum. This is a very special place for the League, and we're very happy to host them today for their centennial. Unless Denise and Jen have anything else they would like me to say in particular, I will turn it over to them for this centennial event. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Will Haynes of the Watkins Museum of History, for hosting this month's Hot Topic, which is a celebration marking 100 years of League of Women Voters, Lawrence, Douglas County. Holding this celebration in this basement meeting room has historic significance, as this was the very room where women's groups met that were precursors to the Lawrence League. Jeff Klein, local historian and league member of its research, and will now share the previously little known history of the League of Women Voters of Lawrence, Douglas County, 1921 to 1931.
Thank you, Denise. In 1995, local historian Katie Armitage presented highlights of the Lawrence League of Women Voters from 1931 to 1959 to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the National League of Women Voters, founded in 1920. Although Lawrence was one of 7 local leagues organized in the early 1920s, she noted the Lawrence League, however, was short-lived, and we know very little about it because apparently no records were kept, at least not locally. As a result, the Lawrence League dated its founding to 1931 and celebrated its 50th year in 1981. For the Kansas League's 50th anniversary in 1969, Barbara Milkey noted, there is much disagreement about the Lawrence League of Women Voters in the years 1920 to 1931, when the first records of the league as we know it today were recorded. She interviewed 3 early members, including Hardy Nelson. Pearl Clark, a 1922 KU graduate, recalled attending the first meeting in 1920 as a political science student and moving back to Lawrence in 1926, the same year that Helen Beale came to Lawrence. Mrs. Beale recalled that, quote, the league started in Lawrence in the 1920s and disbanded because it became too partisan. And the national office was just as happy to see it disband because nonpartisanship was a major objective of the league, end quote. However, the locally reported reasons for disbanding this league in March 1930 may prove far less dramatic than any single event or recorded charge of partisanship. In this essay, I seek to correct historicized accounts by documenting highlights of the long-lived activities of our Douglas County League from its official founding in September 1921 through its reorganization as the Lawrence League in May 1931. Much like the interchangeable names of the Sedgwick County and Wichita League, the official name Douglas County was chosen, even as news reports sometimes refer to the Lawrence League. The Lawrence Daily Journal World newspaper provided this white, woman-run league with high visibility by frequently reporting and thereby verifying its extensive meetings and activities through the 1920s. It is also crucial to recognize that African-American women organized a League of Women Voters number 2 in 1924, led by President Lula Irving and Secretary Gertrude Clark, with 26 members. But unfortunately, the Journal World did not report their activities. Not until 1986 did our official name change to the more geographically inclusive League of Women Voters of Lawrence Douglas County to reflect the group's growing membership and the city's growth. As many know, the National League arose directly from the 7-decade-long fight for women's suffrage, 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment on August 26, 1920. In March 1919, Carrie Chapman Catt, president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, proposed the creation of a League of Women Voters to finish the fight. And Jane Brooks from Wichita, Kansas, was elected chair of this mighty experiment. Upon returning home, Brooks established the first state chapter and Sedgwick County chapter in June. when the former Kansas Suffrage Association agreed to change its name to the Kansas League of Women Voters. In May 1921, the Kansas League met in Lawrence at the Unitarian Church and re-elected Jane Brooks as chairman. From Lawrence, Elsie Neuenschwander was elected state recording secretary. Molly Asher chaired the 2nd Congressional District, and Genevieve Chalkley, Dean Alberta Corbin, and Alice Winston also spoke at this meeting. Shortly thereafter, the Douglas County League of Women Voters was founded on September 27, 1921 at Lawrence's City Hall after meetings with Gladys Pyle, a National League representative. The following officers were elected: President Genevieve Chalkley, Vice President Helen Mitchell, Secretary Gertie K. Johnston, and Treasurer Emma Wall, along with executive board members Mary Strong, Martha Bishop, Virginia Mitchell, Ruth Griffin, and Anna H. Martingale. Appointed committee members included Gertrude Simons for publicity, of course, Mrs. C.F. Melton membership, and Elizabeth Dunn program. At the same meeting, women took immediate action to protest the industrial court's removal of Miss Lene Bressett, who enforced child labor laws as state head of children's welfare. Genevieve H. Chalkley, an active Lawrence suffragist since 1904, was the perfect choice to lead the new league, having worked tirelessly through the 1912 campaign and serving as state president of the renamed Good Citizenship League in 1913. Governors Walter Stubbs and Arthur Capper appointed her respectively to the Board of Control of State Charitable Institutions and to the Kansas Industrial Welfare Commission. After running for but losing a position on the Lawrence School Board in 1919, she conducted a child welfare study in the 2nd Ward for the state in 1920. In February 1922, Chalkley decided to move to England to extend the education of her 2 daughters for 2 years. Anna Lane Johnson, the daughter of suffragist Mary Elizabeth and Senator James H. Lane, was elected league president to finish her term. 1 month later, National President Maud Wood Park spoke in Lawrence with about 65 local members in attendance to clarify league purposes. She emphasized that the league was a nonpartisan, educative organization and not a separate women's political party. In a previous speech, Park had addressed 5 frequently asked questions. For example, is it a mistake to segregate women as voters in a request for special legislation for women and children? She answered, "We hope it will not be necessary to do this for long, but it is necessary until we can catch up with the present inequality of legislation, which has been enacted by men from a masculine point of view." Her 6 slogans offered ongoing tips for conducting legislative work. 1, remember that you have much to learn about your government. 2, don't forget that you also have to teach something which comes directly from your woman's experience. 3, start near home in your public work. 4, begin early. 5, do one thing at a time. 6, keep at it. Eternal vigilance is the price of good government more than any other one thing. Lawrence suffragists had advanced the Kansas women's suffrage movement and thereby introduced 19th century initiatives that remain in practice today. For instance, the Suffrage Advocate, a 4-page newsletter published in Lawrence and distributed to statewide subscribers during the 1894 campaign, reflected similar news in the Voter today. Following national and state organizational procedures, the Douglas County League established several traditions begun after 1912, when Kansas women won universal suffrage. Delegates continued to attend annual Kansas League conventions, and Margaret Vickery reported on her attendance at the Joint National League and Pan American Conference of Women in 1922. Over the years, Lawrence women worked with local community partners and state organizations and hosted the Kansas League Convention in Lawrence in 1927. Like earlier women who had engaged in civic study groups since 1888, League members continue to investigate local, state, and national legislative issues and socioeconomic policies by adopting a state or national program of work for each year. They met every 2 to 4 weeks for teas or luncheons at women's homes, local restaurants, churches, or city hall, and invited local speakers or KU professors to explain contemporaneous topics, much like hot topics today. For example, an economics professor spoke about government ownership of public utilities, and the League of Municipalities secretary explained why he favored the city manager form of government. The League also set up a concession stand at the Douglas County Fair in 1923 to raise money for state and national pledges and citizenship schools. Any woman over age 20 was encouraged to attend meetings and join the League. A KU chapter of the College League, first established in 1909, was reorganized in 1928. Ever since 1887, when Sarah Brown, Frances Schlegel-Caruth, and Annie Diggs taught white and Black women how to register for the municipal elections, the League worked to educate women voters. But voter apathy would prove a long-term and ongoing problem. In 1924, only 51% of US women reportedly voted, in comparison to 68% in 2020. William Allen White decried the "get out the vote" problem by proposing satirical polling signs for men only, while League members suggested for women only signs instead. In Lawrence, 319 more women than men registered to vote for the 1928 presidential election, breaking 1924 records for total registrations. That year, the National League urged permanent registration, similar to automatic voter registration initiatives today. From the beginning, the local league emphasized women's and children's welfare by pushing federal and state legislation with issues that still resonate today. In 1921, the National League achieved passage of the Shepard-Towner Act to provide federal funding for maternity and child care, but the state of Kansas refused to accept governmental aid, similar to Medicaid expansion debates today. Regarding position statements, the Lawrence League planned to endorse the Child Labor Amendment to the US Constitution in 1925, but the state rejected regulating labor for persons under age 18. An economics professor spoke on a minimum wage for industrial women laborers that increased from $10.50 to $11 a week. Local women also followed international affairs by endorsing the World Court attached to the League of Nations, and by attending a state conference on the cause and cure of war in Topeka. In regard to state legislation, KU professor Alberta Corbin, state and local educational chairman of the League, and other speakers discussed various aspects of the Kansas Children's Code Commission. During a statewide movement to improve Kansas schools, the Lawrence branch of the American Association of University Women participated in a survey of rural schools. The Kansas League joined this movement, while Corbin also chaired the Education Committee of the Kansas Council of Women, and Mrs. O'Brien, state AAUW president, shared the survey with local clubs. Dr. Cora M. Downs, a 1924 graduate in bacteriology, also answered questions about the new Kansas Milk Ordinance, a topic that continued into the 1930s. Women also studied local governmental institutions. In 1923, 16 members inspected and compared conditions at the city and county jails. Professor Frank Blackmar considered jails schools of crime unless youth received remedial agency. And his sociology colleague, Elizabeth Nitcher, noted that children under 16 were cared for in a separate county jail room until after their trials. After 2 years of preparation, the League sponsored a School of Citizenship on City Planning in 1926, in partnership with the League of Kansas Municipalities, the Chamber of Commerce, Parent-Teacher Associations, the Social League, Social Service League, and the City Federation of Women's Clubs. 2 National League secretaries who complimented the Lawrence League on these efforts explained leadership development and reorganizing state and local leagues on a ward and precinct basis. Together with other groups, the league also petitioned to preserve Riverside Park along the South Levee. As for potential charges of partisanship, speakers at league meetings included former Kansas Governor Stubbs, W.Y. Morgan, the Republican candidate for governor, 2 mayoral candidates, and 2 Kansas House candidates in the 12th district east of Wichita. In 1928, the league sponsored its first county candidates forum during the primary campaign, led by President Molly Asher and assisted by the Women Christian Temperance Union and War Mothers. For a mock Republican convention with over 1,000 KU students, it is not known whether the league participated as a state delegation. As early as 1870, Lawrence women had run for school board positions, but none were elected until 1887 and 1893 during heated suffrage campaigns. In January 1923, President Stella Gaunt led an enthusiastic meeting, quote, to get the women lined up for women representations on the school board at the next election, and also to urge the women to support women candidates for coming vacancies in city offices, end quote. Members assured Superintendent Smith that they did not intend to stir up trouble, but to allow potentially elected women to investigate complaints during school visits. In a partisan action, the league decided to endorse Molly Asher as their sole school board candidate for the spring election, but she lost to 3 re-elected men. While the league continued to urge the placing of women on school boards or governing bodies, President Martha Quinlan repeated the league's purpose, quote, not to endorse any one candidate, but merely to teach the women how to sum up the qualifications of a candidate and to be well informed generally in regard to public questions and legislation, end quote. Not until 1971 was Nancy Hamilton, a league member, elected to the Lawrence City Commission before serving as the city's first woman mayor in 1973. In early 1929, the league discussed a membership campaign and elected new officers in mid-March. According to the Kansas League budget reports, Lawrence members contributed the lowest amount in dues among 9 local chapters in 1925, and only 2% of the state league's income by April 1929, in comparison to Wichita at 36% and Topeka at 19%. At this time, the salary of the Kansas League's executive secretary required over half of the budget, in addition to National League dues at 12%. As the Great Depression loomed, 4 remaining local leagues, Wichita, Topeka, Arkansas City, and Lawrence, began to show signs of financial struggles. In spring 1930, Lawrence League President Mary S. Thomas, possibly a charter member, requested the presence of all members as far as possible to discuss the question of disarmament with 8 members at the new city hall for the last meeting of the year. On March 24, 1930, the subject of disarmament, which proved one of the most interesting programs of the year, resulted in the following decision, and I quote, after thoughtful consideration of the question, the members of the league voted to disband the organization and to go into the civic department of the Women's City Club, chaired by Mrs. Thomas. This move was decided upon owing to the numerous organizations represented among club members and the expense incident to the upkeep of the league for a small number of members, end quote. We can only imagine what transpired among the following 5 actors in this drama who assisted Thomas in reaching this decision. Back in 1924, former President Quinlan believed that the league should never endorse any one candidate, perhaps even Charter League member Molly Asher, for a nonpartisan school board position. Upon Asher's death in November 1929, Secretary Etta Beardsley read a Douglas County League tribute to her, quote, "As one whom with others the League owes its origin, its maintenance through all the years, and as its past president, a staunch defender of its precepts and practices, who gave of her richest and best to our organization," end quote. As the League's subsequent secretary 1 year later, Hardy Nelson later recalled that offering food during luncheon meetings helped to increase membership. Lizzie Sheldon, an outspoken lawyer, and Margaret Vickery had worked for Mayor Ellis's election, whether before or after the League's disbanding is not known. And they expected an economical administration in keeping with the National League's promotion of efficiency in government in its 1928 bylaws. The Women's City Club, a consolidation of the former City Federation of Clubs, had been organized in 1928 for better, more efficient methods of reaching a greater number of Lawrence women and to keep individual members, rather than smaller clubs, in touch with state and national groups. 200 women heard President Hetty Menger stress this efficiency at the first open meeting in October at the Eldridge Hotel. 1 year later, Patricia N. Solander, the state's first woman senator, spoke to members about pressing state and national issues. At a luncheon with 35 women, she urged women to learn the mechanics of government and the conduct of party politics, and to push and not be discouraged when applying high standards when or if working with one party or another. In early 1931, Mary Thomas was elected second vice president of the Women's City Club and chaired its citizenship committee. Hardy Nelson recalled meeting with Ida S. Hoxie, a former Lawrence resident and district director of the National League, and a small group of women at Lucine Lewis's home sometime in spring 1931. On May 28, 1931, with 35 women present, the Lawrence branch of the League of Women Voters was reorganized by approving a constitution and electing the following officers: President Julia B. Chubb, 4 vice presidents, Mildred Hedrick, Marjorie Bowersock Dalton, Agnes Thompson, and Lucine Lewis. Secretary, Hardy B. Nelson, and Treasurer, Maud B. Thiel. In 1970, the surviving founders of this second league were honored during the 50th anniversary of the National League. The official founding of our local league in 1921, with its nearly decade-long activities, warrants this celebration of our centennial today on the 101st anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Ironically, the founding of the first league and the first open meeting of the second league occurred at the original City Hall located at Vermont and 7th Street. And the disbanding of the first league occurred at the next City Hall building right here in Watkins Museum of History. Hopefully, this brief history will set the record straight for this and future anniversaries. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen, for your sharing the history with us. I was wondering if, where can the paper be found? If somebody wants it.
Yeah, we're going to post it on our league local league website, so anyone can certainly read it there. And plus, I have 2.5 pages of endnotes with other interesting information that I wasn't able to share in with this reading.
I really enjoyed reading through the endnotes. I found it really fleshed out the history with tidbits that, you know, you would go down the rabbit hole with.
Oh, easily,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
I also wanted to remind people that I wrote this history of woman suffrage in Lawrence, 1854 to 1920. It is available as a separate booklet from Watkins Museum for just $5. You can contact Sarah Bell and she'll be happy to get you a copy. And the money for this booklet goes towards the Embattled Lawrence Project, which is, again, local histories of Lawrence coming up this year and next.
Would you like me to show the proclamations now? Okay.
Thank you for those comments, and I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. This is Mayor Finkeldye. Whereas the Douglas County League of Women Voters was founded on September 27th, 1921 at City Hall, then located at Vermont and 7th Street. And whereas this long-lived league studied and impacted several local, state, and national issues, especially in regard to women's and children's welfare. And whereas African-American women organized a League of Women Voters No. 2 in 1924, led by President Lula Carl Irving and Secretary Gertrude Taylor Clark, with 26 members, but with no news reports of its subsequent activities. And whereas the white woman-run Douglas County League disbanded in March 1930, in part because of a small number of members, could not sustain the expenses as the Great Depression intensified. And whereas the reorganized Lawrence League mistakenly dated its permanent founding to May 1931 because no local records existed regarding the first league's activities during the 1920s. Now therefore I, Brad Finkeldye, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, Kansas, do hereby proclaim September 27th, 2021 as the Centennial of the League of Women Voters of Lawrence, Douglas County. Thank you very much to the League. Very important part of this community, has been for years, and we appreciate all that you do. And we have a second proclamation to
Whereas the Douglas County League of Women Voters was founded on September 27, 1921 at City Hall, then located at Vermont and 7th Street, and whereas this long-lived league studied and impacted several local, state, and national issues, especially in regard to women's and children's welfare, and whereas African-American women organized a League of Women Voters No. 2 in 1924, led by President Lula Carr Irving and Secretary Gertrude Taylor Clark, with 26 members, but with no news reports of its subsequent activities. And whereas the white women-run Douglas County League disbanded in March 1930, in part because a small number of members could not sustain expenses as the Great Depression intensified, and whereas the reorganized Lawrence League mistakenly dated its permanent founding to May 1931 because no local records existed regarding the first league's activities during the 1920s. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas hereby proclaims and celebrates September 27th, 2021 as the official centennial of the League of Women Voters of Lawrence, Douglas County. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Over the past 4 years of working together on the State Centennial Committee, we have learned so much about the history of Kansas, the founding of the League of Women Voters of the United States and of Kansas, and the women's movement in general. We've been able to uncover stories about how women of color and white women worked alongside each other at these events, even though their voting rights were not always fought for equally. And we sometimes wondered if the term celebration accurately described how we felt about some parts of suffrage history. Still, the work that went into the passage of the 19th Amendment and the founding of the League of Women Voters is something to honor and proclaim, as it was a very important step on the path towards suffrage for all.
With that in mind, we joined the Lawrence Douglas County League in celebrating their 100th anniversary. Your league's history is a real story of perseverance, being founded in 1921, then disbanding, and then established again. The work of the league, even back then, was too important to neglect, and the women in the Lawrence area made sure it would continue. As Jeannie Klein's article quotes LWV US President Maud Wood Park saying at a Lawrence gathering in 1922, "Keep at it. Eternal vigilance is the price of good government more than any other thing." Indeed, this is still true today and embodied in our current mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. Thank you all for letting us share in this special event, and here's to the next 100.
So on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Kansas, your co-presidents, Martha Pint,
And Jackie Lightcap,
congratulate you and wish you much success in your next 100 years.
Were there any comments or questions from?
Yes, we had a number of great comments. I want to read this comment first. It wasn't a question, it was just a comment from Flora Wordsworth, and it's for Jen. She says, "Jen Klein is completely scathingly historic," followed by lightning bolt, ballot box, clenched fist emojis.
Thank you, Flora.
Emily Reiner said, "Thanks so much for sharing all of this research, Jen."
You're welcome.
Kay Emerson said, "Thank you for live streaming." And then Kay Johnson just said, "That's right, we have to keep at it. Congratulations, League of Women Voters, Lawrence and Douglas County."
Great.
I had a question that I wonder if you could address. So actually, I had a couple. In this era, were the members of the league, the Lawrence League, mainly Democratic or Republican?
Good question. My guess might have been Republican, but I bet there were Democrats, and I bet there were some independents too. I'm trying to remember, it was the 1920, my memory's fading. I'm so glad my booklet's here. It was in trying to remember the year that it was Wilson, what year was Woodrow Wilson elected president? Help me here.
He was first elected in 1912.
Well, there you go. Okay, so that's when the Democratic tide started turning. Okay, so that's why I'm saying I obviously, in terms of the newspaper reports, I don't have exactly which parties these women belong to. Again, it was nonpartisan. They didn't talk about it, at least not publicly in the newspapers. But I'm assuming there would have been both on both sides. It seems like, well, again, I can't say. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
We keep those close to our chest.
I have a couple of other questions. Were there any immigrant members of the league, or was it all native-born residents?
That's a great question. Again, I'm leaning on newspapers, and the newspapers don't necessarily talk about it. I did try to look up the ancestry of some, but not all league members, so it's hard to tell. I mentioned Elsie Neuenschwander, and she was born in Switzerland. And then her parents immigrated to the States, to New York City at some point, and then she eventually made their way to Lawrence. And I still want to know if she might be any relation at all to Dan Neuenschwander, who's one of our former, I think it's Douglas County superintendents. Is that correct? She never married, and she's not buried here in Lawrence, but I do wonder, because there were several women KU faculty who taught both in the French and German departments, because they had, again, some family background or what have you. But they themselves, I don't think, were actually immigrants. It would have been their parents. They would have been second generations.
Okay. And
well, and Elizabeth or Genevieve Chalkley, her husband was British.
of course, yeah.
Okay, but she herself was born in the States.
So we have a comment, a nice closing comment here from Kimberly Haskin Williams. Great historic information.
Thank you. It is fascinating. And maybe I could just reiterate, the reason Katie Armitage and the League members back in 1969 could not find any information from the 1920s is because it was buried in the newspapers. And I want, and again, the advantage that I and many others have now is that all of those newspapers from the 20s are now available online. I didn't have to read microfilm. All I had to do is sit in the comfort of my home and search newspapers using lots of different search terms to dig up all this history. And that's something that Katie Armitage did not have, available to her back in 1995. So we are incredibly blessed to have online access to newspapers, because that's where a lot of this history is buried. It's all scattered in newspapers. And obviously, some newspaper reports may be more accurate than others. As I mentioned in one of my endnotes, the newspapers did not always report, here's what happened at a meeting. They would announce the meeting, but then they wouldn't say, here's everything that happened at the meeting. So again, it's limited, but it is another piece of archival research that we can use now.
If there are no other questions, what would a birthday party be without cake and candles? So hang on, we gotta see how this works. Let's do it safely.
Thank you, Denise, for making chocolate.
You're welcome. They're very yummy, very yummy cupcakes.
This is wonderful. Wow.
Happy Centennial to us.
Happy Centennial to everybody out there in Facebook land. Well, we want to enjoy the candles for a little bit. Ready? For all the women, on behalf of all the women who have met in this very community room, south basement room of what was Watkins Bank, we wish everyone a happy 100 years.
So then behalf on the current board of League of Women Voters, Lawrence Douglas County, we would like to hope you'll join us over the next 100 years to empower voters and defend democracy.